When it comes to Bond games, a large majority of them are first-person shooters. This does make sense to make a game based on this character with this gameplay in mind. The best of the Bond first-person shooters provide interesting levels, situations, and opportunities for exploration and gadgets to really immerse the player within the world of Bond. In these games, the player sees the world through Bond's eyes and experiences what he would see on one of his adventures. But a shift in perspective could allow for a fresh take and room for new gameplay opportunities. Bond is a character with a large skill set, and this can often be seen in many of his action sequences in his films. He can fly helicopters, operate tanks, drive any vehicle, brawl with henchmen, take part in shootouts, and a lot more. After Redwood Shores made an excellent first-person shooter experience with Agent Under Fire, they wanted to tackle the Bond franchise but from a new and fresh perspective. They aimed to shift the action from first to third to allow for more gameplay opportunities for the player, along with providing a presentation that would be on par with a Bond film. Join me as we take a look back at Everything or Nothing. Agent Under Fire was EA Redwood Shores' first attempt at the Bond franchise. Originally, this game was going to be the PS2 version of The World Is Not Enough, but through its development, it morphed into a completely original Bond experience. The developers preferred this approach as they were not limited by only basing their levels on events from the film, and could freely go in whatever direction they wanted to. Agent Under Fire was and is a solid first-person shooter and a great Bond experience. At the time, Bond games were mostly first-person shooters, and Agent Under Fire played within this space as well, while also providing plenty of opportunities for gadgets and vehicle-based sequences for rail shooting and driving gameplay. Eurocom was helming the next Bond experience with Nightfire, and as such, EA provided Redwood with another opportunity to make a new Bond game. While Nightfire was being developed, Redwood was hard at work at creating something new for the Bond franchise. It was tempted to create another first-person shooter set within the world, but the developers had their hearts set on something else. This new game was going to need a name, and the developers came up with Everything or Nothing, and they were inspired by the production company for the Bond films, EON, to come up with this name. During the very early stages of development, the team wanted to change the perspective that was provided to the player. Instead of a first-person shooter, this new Bond game was going to be played from the third-person perspective. Redwood felt that shifting perspectives from first to third would allow them more freedom in what gameplay variations that they could offer to the player. For example, Bond often engages in fistfights and brawls with his enemies. Melee from the first person can be a bit clunky and is often something that is expected more from third-person action games. This was a piece of action that was not provided within any of the prior Bond titles. Along with this, Bond is a character with a broad skill set that allows him to take part in a variety of action sequences. He improvises, gets into fistfights, drives cars, uses gadgets, and engages in shootouts. The melee within Everything or Nothing was going to be a simple yet fun system. They aimed to have a limited moveset that was both fun and easy for players to pick up. Bond could perform a set of combos based on a 2-button melee system, along with throwing enemies, entering into a brief counter stance for incoming attacks, or picking up melee weapons as a means to deal more damage. Shooting was also going to be featured, and with this change in perspective, players could use a simple cover system to avoid enemy fire. The shooting this time would feature a lock-on mechanic that would allow Bond to snap to an enemy, and then the player could target specific spots on the enemy's body. The goal was to have the melee and shooting gel together and be two options that you could change on the fly. Driving was going to make a return, and planned on being featured even more than the prior Bond titles. So much so that the driving portions of the game were again going to use the Need for Speed engine, along with being developed by an entirely separate team. For Redwood Shores, refining and really nailing down the third-person mechanics were top priority early on. Since everything else was going to be based on this, they wanted this to feel the best it could for the player. there. When it came to the story, the developers were in a very fortunate spot. They recruited one of the writers who worked on 3 of the Brosnan films to work with their team of writers to come up with an original Bond story. At the same time, the team was tempted to revisit a classic Bond story, but they felt that since they wanted to show new gameplay mechanics to the player within this game, that it would also fit to have an original story as well. The developers had a good relationship with the film production company for Bond, and they were very supportive of the direction that Redwood was going in. One thing that really elevated the presentation for the game was how many actors returned to voice their characters within the game, along with big stars taking part in this big project. While Brosnan's likeness was used in Nightfire, this would be the first time that he would be voicing Bond in a video game. Essentially, with this being an original story, working with one of the film's writers, along with having the characters reprise their roles for the game, this was turning into a kind of 5th film for Brosnan, but one that could actually be played. Maya provided the song for the game's introduction and was even featured as a character within the game. The developers worked with her to create the song that could be sung at a jazz club and then would be featured again later in the game. The team were big fans of the villain Jaws and wanted to feature him as well, and were able to get the original actor to come back. This was really turning into a very ambitious project for both Redwood Shores and EA. From a gameplay perspective, they were going in a new direction to provide the players with something fresh and new, along with providing the production quality that one would expect from a Bond film. The third-person action would allow for the developers to deliver a large variety of situations to put Bond into, from using different vehicles, new gadgets not seen in films, simple yet fun melee combat, along with cover-based shooting. In February 2004, Everything or Nothing was released to the world. Everything or Nothing's gameplay is mainly focused on third-person combat with a mix of vehicle-based levels, rail shooting, and driving. The third-person combat is a combination of shooting and fist-fighting. Both of these can be seamlessly transitioned to on the fly. For the most part, this makes the action feel really interesting and provides you with a lot of options. 1 second you could be shooting somebody, and next you are punching a gun out of their hand and then throwing them around. Then you throw in all the gadgets that you can use, and you have a lot of options for each of the third-person action sequences. Along with this, Everything or Nothing has several levels that offer vehicles for Bond to drive, from motorcycles to cars, and even a fun tank sequence. All the vehicles handle very well and provide so much variety, along with showing off Bond's broad skill set. Everything or Nothing really does nail the gameplay variety from different situations, objectives, along with how you play the game. This game completely captures Bond's skill set along with the range of action these films can provide. Let's start out with the third-person combat. Everything or Nothing has a simple yet enjoyable melee system. You have 2 buttons dedicated to melee attacks, and you can do a few different combos with them. Along with this, you can hit both buttons at the same time and grab an enemy to throw them around. In most cases, this will make quick work out of your foes. You can also opt to enter a counter stance to counter an incoming melee attack. Some of the levels have optional melee weapons that you can pick up, like a bottle or a crowbar. These can do a lot of damage, and in some cases these weapons can instantly kill an enemy. And lastly, melee attacks tend to cause enemies to drop their weapons. The shooting is a large focus as well with these third-person sections. You can take cover behind objects along with crouching behind waist-high cover. Aiming is done with a lock-on mechanic, and once you fire, Bond will pop out of cover. The cover system works fine, but I found myself using the crouch to hide behind waist-high cover more throughout most of the shootouts. You can also dodge roll to either get closer to your enemies or avoid enemy damage. The game has a small but useful set of weapons to use. You have a few pistols, a shotgun, a few automatics, and a few others. The weapons have pretty good sounds along with some nice impact to your shots. Enemies will react where you hit them in very satisfying ways. If you hit an enemy in a leg or arm, you will stun them and leave them open to rush in to hit them with a melee hit. You can even shoot their gun out of their hand. An interesting aspect about the shooting is how all the guns have a low ammo count. You never feel like you have a lot of ammo for any of your guns. This means you will be frequently switching to new weapons in a gunfight. The low ammo encourages you to not waste your shots and aim accordingly. Along with this, it makes sense how the melee fighting and shooting are intertwined with each other and can be seamlessly changed during most of the fights. This allows the player to have a lot of options on how they want to tackle the enemies. Do they want to focus on using cover and shooting? Or do they use the dodge roll, soften up some of the enemies with some shots, and then use a melee hit to finish them off? The transition between shooting and melee works pretty well. My only issue is with the lock-on with the shooting. Each of the different weapons have different ranges to them, so you will see an enemy in front of you, but if they are too far away for your equipped weapon, you will not lock onto them. This can be really annoying, as in some cases you will lock onto an enemy that you are not aiming at. Transitioning between shooting to melee works really well, but there are some hiccups when going from fist fighting to shooting. Sometimes the lock-on will not work right and you will not be locking on to an enemy that is right in front of you. This doesn't happen often, but when it does, it will cause you to take needless damage. This is the area of the game that shows its age the most with the lock-on. But one aspect that I do like about the lock-on is how you can fine-tune your aim once you are locked on to an enemy. Here you can opt to hit a specific body part, shoot their gun out of their hand, or go for that headshot. There are some issues with the lock-on at times, but for the most part the combat is really satisfying, along with being able to mix up with fist fighting and shooting. As you progress throughout the campaign, you will unlock more gadgets to provide you with more options within the third-person sequences. You will get a useful spider gadget that can go into small spaces and pick up items for you like armor, along with being able to blow up nearby enemies. The sleep darts are great because they can instantly take out an enemy, but you have a limited amount of them. Then you have different coin grenades like an explosive coin or a flashbang version. Midway through the campaign, you will be able to turn invisible. This will really drain your battery fast, and you can only restore your battery with additional pickups. You can move freely while invisible, and this provides you with more stealth options or just as a means to get a drop on your enemies. But your cloak gets turned off if you perform any attack, so you need to keep this in mind. One of the main gadgets is your rappel gun. This allows for some verticality to the gameplay. At specific points, you can use this to ascend or descend to other levels. Some of the action sequences even use this while you are fighting enemies. The player's options for the third-person sequences are pretty extensive. I really enjoyed the melee fighting and how much fun it is to beat up bad guys. The hits sound good, and throwing them around never gets old. The shooting is also solid, with some hiccups with the lock-on, and when you add in the gadgets the player has, you have so many different ways to tackle the different situations. Almost all of the third-person levels allow you to tackle them the way you want to. Earning these new gadgets also adds to the replay value. It is worth mentioning that there are some sequences that offer optional stealth. You can perform takedowns on enemies and use your silenced pistol and sleeping darts to aid in this playstyle, but the game isn't really built for fully fleshed out stealth. The invisibility helps to provide more stealthy options, but once you are caught, then it's back to open combat. There is one level that is an instant fail mission, and I think it's one of the weaker missions within the game. Everything or Nothing just isn't built for situations like this, and when you force the player to play this way with instant fails, this can cause some frustration. The stealth is fun enough as an option, but it lacks the depth to really make it a true avenue to fully explore within the game. Another thing to note is the use of the Bond sense. This will cause the game to go into slow-mo. Here you can survey your environment, find key objectives, identify other enemies, and useful items. This acts as a way for the player to get some hints if they are stuck, or to find a way to use a rappel point or find a box full of weapons. And while the third-person combat takes up the bulk of the gameplay, there are a wealth of levels and situations dedicated to different vehicles, and they are awesome.
The plane is taxiing to leave, 007. You must get on board.
There's an impressive amount of different vehicle levels. The driving sections are awesome between the different vehicles, and motorcycles both are great to control. Most of the cars come with their own weapons like missiles, machine guns, and sometimes other gadgets. There are plenty of high action sequences with each of the vehicles. One of the best ones with a motorcycle has you chasing Jaws down a highway. You really get a sense of speed and the danger that comes with it. There's a nice amount of Bond moments here as well, like going under an exploding tanker or driving through some construction. These sort of things make for great set pieces and and greatly changes up the third-person action. Early on, there is a short but fun vehicle section that provides you with some choices depending on what vehicle you choose to take. You can opt to take Bond's car or a motorcycle. Driving each of them is completely different, and it adds some nice replay value. There are some fun one-off type vehicle levels with a fun sequence where you get to control a tank, along with an enjoyable helicopter sequence that ends with a fun little boss fight. But not all of the car levels are action focused. Some have some interesting objectives that keeps the action engaging and keeps the player guessing. One level gives you a city to drive through to complete your objectives. There's a lot of variety provided in this car sequence. You first need to steal a truck and then chase a hitman before he gets to your ally. The way the level is designed allows you to take advantage of certain sections of the city to complete your objectives faster. This level shows Bond's car in a different light, and I really liked it. One of my favorite levels within the game features Bond stealing the clothes and car of a driver within a race. The winner of the race gets to have dinner with the main villain of the story. Bond thinks this is the best way to catch the villain off guard. So this entire level is just a racing level, but how this factors into the story and Bond as a character is great. Bond would use different aliases or disguises to get close to the villains in the films, and here you get to play out one of those sequences. Then there are vehicle levels that have you start out in a normal car as you try to reach your hideout to get to your heavily armored vehicle. This allows the player to focus on the driving and escaping a threat, and then being able to turn the tables and start attacking once you get the better vehicle. Like I said before, Everything or Nothing provides a lot of variety in so many different ways with its gameplay. There are even some decent boss fights within the game as well. One of them provides you with a classic Bond situation of needing to save the girl. She is getting closer to the fire and you need to hit a button to cause her to move away from it. The boss can also hit the button, causing her to go closer to the fire. The boss is just a bullet spongy enemy, but the situation of need to keep an eye on your ally is pretty fun. There's a few short enjoyable fights with Jaws and a level dedicated to stopping a machine and killing a main henchman. In this level, you need to complete your objectives as fast as possible since the enemies keep pouring in. The boss fights are not the best areas of the game, but they provide some nice fun and short situations. One of the biggest reasons why I find this title to be one of the best Bond games is how it fully utilizes Bond's skill set. Up to this point, we had some really great Bond games, and all of them were first-person shooters with a focus on the shooting. Many of them did provide good variety through gadgets, objectives, and vehicle sequences, but I think Everything or Nothing does this the best as it fully captures the largest amount of Bond's skills. When you think of Bond, he is not just a man with a gun. He will improvise, he drives fancy cars, takes advantage of situations to escape, he uses useful gadgets, and the ability to use different vehicles. Everything or Nothing has shooting, fistfighting, optional stealth, plenty of gadgets, driving levels with different vehicles, a helicopter level, 2 tank stages, and so much more. The developers made a great effort to really capture his broad skill set, and this makes the entire game feel like such a unique experience. Also, I want to praise the absolutely awesome introductory mission for the game. It nails both the production values that you would want from a Bond intro along with exciting gameplay. This entire section centers around explosive third-person shooting. You get quickly introduced to the cover system along with the lock-on targeting. There are plenty of enemies to fight, and if you get close to an enemy, you can try out some of the melee combat. Along with this, you get to use your rappel gun, adding some verticality to the combat as well. Then the level is bookended with blowing up several vehicles and then escaping. The icing on the cake is that the song sequence following this is pretty good as well and puts a nice little bow on this excellent introduction. This might be my favorite of the Bond introductions because of how the presentation is very high and delivers a quality introduction from that perspective, and the gameplay section is not an on-rails experience. You are in control of the entire thing, thrown right into the action with some on-screen prompts to get you comfortably into it. There isn't a lot in the way of exploration or variability, but it delivers a very direct and action-packed level which fits nicely into a Bond intro. This is an excellent start for Everything or Nothing. Another thing to note is that while Everything or Nothing does not offer areas for exploration like in GoldenEye and Nightfire, it does offer a lot of gameplay variety and options for third-person action sequences. In many ways, I see Everything or Nothing as the ultimate Bond experience, and the wealth of different gameplay situations factors into this along with the cast and presentation. It is really impressive how this game is an original story that features Pierce Brosnan voicing the character again, along with Willem Dafoe as the villain and other actors from the films. This adds authenticity to the presentation that makes Everything or Nothing feel like an unofficial 5th Brosnan film. The voice acting is pretty good across the board, and while the story can get very over the top with some situations, where this might be a bit too silly in a film, it fits right in for a video game adaptation. There's some decent one-liners thrown in there, and the cutscenes hold up as well. My only real negative on the story is how the villain is underdeveloped. He at least has more of a presence to him than the prior game villains of the original story, stories, but I wish Willem Dafoe had more to work with. The story is enjoyable, and at the end of the day, it feels like playing a new Bond film from the Brosnan era. After you beat the campaign, you can replay campaign missions again to earn gold and platinum medals for unlockables. Also, after beating the game, you can also unlock 2 different endurance type modes to play. They are both survival type game modes and are very fun. Everything or Nothing does come with co-op and a multiplayer mode. The multiplayer does feel like an afterthought, as it's just a third-person arena that has a camera in a fixed position. It is fun to mess around in, but it does not have the lasting power of Agent Under Fire or Nightfire. The co-op is the true star for the optional gameplay. Here you will run through a separate campaign with its own levels. You have a set amount of lives for each of the campaign missions, and there is definitely balancing issues with enemies continually pouring in. It is a lot of fun, but you need to be in the right mindset for the co-op. It felt like a pretty good base to improve upon for future titles, but it needed more refinement. Both the co-op and the multiplayer are not what I think of when I think of Everything or Nothing. When it comes to the single player campaign, it is absolutely awesome and delivers the ultimate Bond experience. Before we move to the conclusion, I want to take a moment to praise the soundtrack. This game has the same composer as the TV show for 24, and he does a great job for this game. There are some memorable tracks here, and here are a few tracks from the game. Everything or Nothing is easily one of my favorite Bond games, along with being the ultimate Bond experience. While prior games like GoldenEye, Agent Under Fire, and Nightfire did a great job at capturing the character through first-person shooters, Everything or Nothing changes from first to third person allows Bond to have even more variety. And variety is something that very much comes into play when I think of action sequences with James Bond. The shift to third person allowed the game to have a simple yet fun melee system, along with cover-based shooting. Everything or Nothing goes to great lengths to ensure that the player never really knows what the next level might have in store for them. One level might have you operating a tank, driving a motorcycle, rappelling down a building, and so much more. And on top of all of this, the actors from the films reprise their roles for the game, along with getting more stars to make the entire production feel like a new Brosnan film. Everything or Nothing impressed me a lot when it first came out, and my opinion hasn't changed. The developers really understood how Bond lends himself to many different types of action sequences, and it's all shown very well here. I love Everything or Nothing, and this is definitely one of the best Bond games. Thank you very much for watching.